In this video, we'll look at adjusting skies and foliage using the hue saturation command. So we have several memory colors, and these are colors that we refer to as skin tones, skies, and foliage. And these are colors that we are particularly sensitive to, that they need to be believable, otherwise our images just won't come across as quite being authentic. So let's start with the easier one, and we'll take a look at skies. Now, this is the file without any adjustments, and this file is in your folder for this week, week 4 in the Publishing 1124 class. The thing with skies is that the magenta should be no more than half the cyan. In other words, if the cyan reads 60%, then the magenta should be no more than 30%. So let's take a look at this file and see if it checks out. So I've put a color sampler up here in the sky. And when I go over here and I read the info panel, I can see the cyan is reading 45%. So half of that is 22%, 22, 23. The magenta in this case is only 13. So I know this is perfectly fine as far as the sky goes. Now let's take a look at what it would look like if the sky has too much magenta in it. So I've created a hue saturation adjustment layer that sort of cranks the magenta up, and you can see the color in this image. In this case, the magenta is reading 33%, significantly more than the 23% that we said is the maximum. So let's take a look at before and after. And you can see when the magenta gets too high, we get this purpley sort of color. Now, if we take a look at just adding a bit of saturation, we can darken that sky down a little bit, and we can give it a little extra magenta without going over that magical 23% mark. Now in this case, I've upped the cyan a little bit more, so half of 49, let's make it easy and call it 50. So we should not exceed 25% on the magenta, and we're not right now. So I can see that this is a sky that checks out as correct. Now foliage gets perhaps a little more difficult on the math in order to evaluate. However, we can certainly figure this out quite easily. For instance, with foliage, anything that's green and alive, and there's a lot of variation in the greens that we find in nature. So this is a rough guide, but by no means should be followed absolutely to the letter for every plant. So let's say the cyan is 60%. The yellow can be up to half again as much. In other words, yellow can be half again more than 60. So 1.5 times 60 equals 90. So if the yellow is up to 90% when the cyan is reading 60, that would be okay. You'll find some plants where the cyan is closer, but it's very rare that the cyan is higher than the yellow or equal to the yellow. It's just too blue of a green in order to exist in nature. Let's follow through an example here. Let's say the cyan reads 85%. And the yellow is reading 85. Well, half again more. So if I take 65 times 1.5, that comes out to about 98%. So the yellow could be up as high as 98, but in our example, it's reading 85. That would be okay. Now, if I take the yellow minus the cyan, in other words, 85 minus 65 equals 20. Now, it can be kind of handy to have a calculator or use your phone and bring up the calculator app. Have that around when you're figuring these values out. So, 85 minus 65 equals 20. If I take that 65% value for the cyan and subtract 20, I get 45. This gives me the value for magenta. The magenta cannot exceed 45%. So let's take a look at our example here, and I'll read sampler number 3. Down here, we've got that readout right here. Now, the cyan is reading Let's round it off to 70%. Half again more, or 1.5 times 70, is 105. Well, these numbers can't go over 100%. We're not allowed to use more than 100% ink. So the cyan, if it's reading 70, the yellow can be up at 100. And in this case it is. So that's okay. 99 minus 69 is 30. So I'm taking the yellow and subtracting the cyan. I get 30%. I subtract 30% from 69 and I get 39. Now I know then magenta cannot exceed 39%, and it doesn't in this case. The magenta is 34%. That's lower than 39. Now if I add too much magenta to a green, of course it goes gray. So here's what happens when magenta goes too high. See how my trees they lose that sort of brightness and they become sort of grayish and dark. They lose some of the vibrancy. So there's before, there's after. If I take the cyan too high, you can see that my greens go quite blue. Here's before, here's after. I suggest you download this file and try it out and try changing these layers here. Turn them off and turn them on again. And take a look what it looks like when the magenta is too high or when the cyan is too high, and see how that changes the green. So I'll just end this video leaving this bit of math visible here. This information is in your notes, so you can certainly have a look at the PDF and double check the math behind it and see how we can determine whether these colors are legit or not. The more realistic your colors look, the more that people are going to respond favorably to your work. So it's more than just setting the highlight and shadow at this point.